Before I start the video, I want to express my condolences to Charlie Kirk's family, especially his children. To have your father assassinated in front of you and available to be viewed across social media platforms will undoubtedly cause trauma and have an everlasting impact on your life. And for the record, I do not condone, nor do I celebrate the unfortunate demise of Charlie Kirk. Let's get that out the way. Steph and media. The purpose of this video is to analyze Charlie Kirk's talking points regarding DEI and white versus black criminal behaviors. I will be exploring what he states as fact and seemingly irrefutable evidence versus what the data ultimately shows. Only one thing. I'll be using ChatGPT. The purpose of my using ChatGPT is to make it less about me, in my opinion, and to see what the data suggests with no bias and or emotions. So my first question was DEI used the way it was intended? DEI began as a civil rights driven effort to dismantle systemic discrimination and create genuine equity and belonging, going beyond simple compliance to expand access and representation. Over time, however, it has faced criticism and uneven outcomes, sometimes advancing opportunity and inclusion, but other times reduced to optics, legal battles, or poorly executed programs. All right, so, it has started out okay, but once again, with all new programs, it faced challenges. All right, that's always going to happen. All right, second question. From what you know, pop in the chat once again, from what you know, has DEI fulfilled its purpose by producing good economic outcomes? Fair question, right? Question chat says yes. When implemented well, DEI programs expand opportunities, foster navigation, reduce turnover, and better utilize human capital, leading to gains in productivity, profitability, and overall economic growth. So historical evidence says it was a good thing for the economy to implement DEI. My third question was, is there research indicating that in aviation and medicine, less qualified individuals are sometimes selected over more qualified candidates? Chat says, in aviation, all pilots must pass the same rigorous FAA standards, meaning DEI cannot compromise safety or competency. Instead, DEI expands access through scholarships and outreach with no evidence that airlines hire less qualified pilots due to diversity efforts. So that directly refutes the statement he said when he sees a black pilot, he questions if he's qualified, or I hope he's qualified. Evidence suggests that shouldn't be a concern, okay? If evidence says that, I don't blame him. I would say the same thing. I want to be safe. I don't care who's driving it, as long as they're qualified, right? But the evidence suggests or proves that shouldn't be a concern due to FAA qualifications. Okay, in medicine, while medical schools may weigh race in admissions, every doctor must still pass the same licensing exams and residency standards, ensuring core competence. Research shows that once admitted, minority doctors perform comparably to peers, and representation itself can improve patient outcomes, particularly for Black patients. Okay? So the overall bottom line is DEI changes who gets access to training and opportunities, but not change what it takes to become a licensed doctor or certified pilot. Competency standards remain universal and legally enforced. So by law, they have to comply to these standards by law. So once again, it looks like it refutes the idea that DEI is hiring less qualified individuals over more qualified due to the data and historical records. So I came up with an analogy to express what we just went through, right? To more relatable terms, so it's not just definitions or stats. You have two equally talented piano players dream of performing on the world stage. One comes from a wealthy family with easy access to lessons, a grand piano, and audition opportunities, while the other faces financial and social barriers that limit access to the same resources. DEI steps in only at the entry point, providing the second pianist with a scholarship and mentorship to reach auditions, without lowering the standards of talent, skill, or performance required. In the end, both pianists must prove their ability through the same rigorous evaluations, showing that DEI doesn't replace merit, but removes unfair barriers so qualified individuals can compete on equal footing. Competing on equal footing. How do you feel about that? Because according to Charlie Kirk's stance on this very subject is, he says, if you can't qualify, or if you can't qualify, you can't enter. Regardless, but DEI kind of puts it on equal footing, and it's up to you whether you believe that's fair. But judging by this right here, do you think it's fair for the second pianist to be able to compete utilizing DEI for scholarships to get to auditions? Okay, because in Charlie Kirk's world, they can't compete. All right, so my fourth question is now this is in regards to the white versus black crime. Number 4, is it true that white versus black offenders are similar, but when it comes to being charged, blacks are being charged at a higher rate? All right. Chat says, yes, it is factually accurate that black Americans are arrested for marijuana possession at a rate approximately 3.6 times higher than white Americans, despite similar usage rates between the two groups. So both are doing the same thing just as much as each other, as the other ones are doing it, but blacks are blacks are being arrested 3.6 times higher. That's pretty significant, especially if you extrapolate that to longer periods of time. Okay, that can lead to. No, I'm not going to get into it, but just the data alone is pretty bad. Okay, so chat says this disparity highlights systemic issues with law enforcement practices, including over-policing in black communities and potential biases in arrest decisions. Such disparities underscore the need for comprehensive criminal justice reform to ensure equitable treatment across all racial groups. Saying that it should be fair, right? If I do a crime, I should be charged the same way as you, whether you're white or black. But the data but shows that's not happening. Okay, so my 5th question was, with that said, is it unfair or misleading to say blacks commit more crimes than whites? Once again, directly correlating with one of his statements. Chat says it's misleading to claim blacks commit more crimes than whites because while arrest and incarceration rates are higher per capita for black Americans, those numbers reflect structural inequality, over-policing, and systemic bias rather than inherent criminality. In reality, disparities in arrests, charging, and sentencing stems from poverty, discrimination, and concentrated disadvantage, not from greater offending. Did y'all get that? Let's read that one again. It's misleading to claim blacks commit more crimes than whites because while arrest and incarceration rates are higher per capita for black Americans, those numbers reflect structural inequality, over-policing, and systemic bias rather than inherent criminality. In reality, disparities in arrests, charging, and sentencing stems from poverty, discrimination, and concentrated disadvantage, not from greater offending. So I created another analogy to illustrate that point, right? Once again, to make it more relatable, all right, to where it's less emotional, because I know people get emotional when they read stuff like this or see stats like this. So, so the analogy is, imagine a factory with 2 shifts. On first shift, workers often take extra breaks and bend safety rules, but management tends to look the other way. But on second shift, employees behave in the same way, yet supervisors crack down hard with write-ups, suspensions, and terminations. Over time, this uneven accountability frustrates second shift workers, leading to higher turnover and a reputation for being problem employees. This mirrors the racial justice analogy. When white and black communities show similar behaviors, black communities often face harsher policing and punishment, creating the impression of higher criminality when the real issue is unequal enforcement and accountability. Once again, 3.6 times the rate, and once again, if you extrapolate that, you can see how one race may appear to have an advantage over the other, or one race appear to commit more crimes when that's not the case, at least according to data, not my opinion. Okay, here we go. So number 6, and I'm gonna get more and more direct as the questions unfold. All right, more and more direct. So number 6, given Charlie Kirk's stance on DEI and his views on black versus white criminal behavior, along with his large following and the influence of his rhetoric, was his impact on society ultimately positive or negative? Chat says, Charlie Kirk's framing of DEI and race often relies on raw arrest and incarceration stats without addressing systemic factors, which oversimplifies complex realities and risks misrepresenting racial disparities. While its rhetoric energizes young conservatives, it also reinforces stereotypes, fuels resentment, and deepens social division instead of advancing solutions. Doesn't sound too positive, right? So the bottom line is Charlie Kirk is effective at building influence and shaping opinion, but the way he talks about DEI and race and crime often leaves out crucial context. It's all about the context, y'all. Context is everything. That framing tends to breed negativity, resentment, racial polarization, simplistic us versus them thinking, more than it fosters constructive dialogue or problem solving. Once again, extrapolate this, right? Imagine this going on for years and years and years. What type of minds is he creating? Okay, so my 7th question. Once again, it's getting more and more direct, right? Do you think he intentionally influenced white audiences, younger white audience, in a way that could reinforce a sense of racial superiority? When chat says, while there's no direct evidence that Charlie Kirk explicitly promoted white superiority, his rhetoric on DEI and racial disparities effectively fosters division and can lead some young white followers to feel a sense of racial advantage or resentment. Let me read that one again, all right? Do you think he intentionally influenced younger white audiences in a way that can reinforce a sense of racial superiority? Chat says, while there is no direct evidence that Charlie Kirk explicitly promoted white superiority, his rhetoric on DEI and racial disparities effectively fosters division and can lead some young white followers to feel a sense of racial advantage or resentment. Do you think that can be dangerous? Potentially? Number 8. Once again, more direct. So my next question was, can this lead to violence, and does this mean he was spreading hate? Can this lead to violence, and was he spreading hate is the question. Now, I'm pretty sure a lot of you all have used chat, right? It's one of the most reliable sources out there right now. But have you noticed that when you ask it a question, usually it gives you the whys and whos before it says yes or no? Keep that in mind. So, not for a third time to be like Dr. Umar, but he says, I asked him, can this lead to violence? And does this mean he was spreading hate? Chat says, yes. Damn, yes. Rhetoric like this can contribute to violence and can be considered a form of spreading hate, even if not explicitly calling for it. Here's why. Messaging that frames one group as threatened or disadvantaged by others can heighten fear, resentment, and even radicalization, creating conditions where hostility feels justified. By portraying racial disparities without context, such rhetoric reinforces stereotypes and can foster prejudice, which aligns with the definition of spreading hate. That doesn't sound good, but I'm just looking at the data. Now, my opinion, this is chat, but I have to read that one again. Answer was yes. Rhetoric like this can contribute to violence and can be considered a form of spreading hate, even if not explicitly calling for it. Here's why. Messaging that frames one group as threatened or disadvantaged by others can heighten fear, resentment, and even radicalization, creating conditions where hostility feels justified. By portraying racial disparities without context, such rhetoric reinforces stereotypes and can foster prejudice, which aligns with the definition of spreading hate. Okay, so with that said, I have one more question, and this is it. What do you think it is? What do you gather from this data that I'm sharing with you? Once again, this is not my data. This is ChatGPT. Once again, has historical data, evidence, etc., and it's not taking words out of context because it has everything. Okay, so what would your last question be? I only have one question, and once again, very direct. So I apologize. Okay, so my ninth question was, using all historical evidence available to you, if the goal is to have peace and racial harmony, namely between whites and blacks, in one sentence, was Charlie Kirk's rhetoric good or bad for society if peace is the overall goal? I admit, that's a damn good question. That's a damn good question. Not because I wrote it, because it's a damn good question. All right. But you know what? Calm down. All right. Ask it one more time. I do like the question. All right. Using all historical evidence available to you, if the goal is to have peace and racial harmony, namely between whites and blacks, in one sentence, was Charlie Kirk's rhetoric good or bad for society if peace is the overall goal? Chat says, if the ultimate goal is racial harmony, then Charlie Kirk's rhetoric, which often emphasizes division and frames racial disparities without full context, has been bad for society because it deepens mistrust, polarization, rather than fostering understanding and unity. I gotta read that one more time, much slower. If the ultimate goal is racial harmony, then Charlie Kirk's rhetoric, which often emphasizes division and frames racial disparities without full context, not explaining anything, just giving raw numbers. This has been bad for society because it deepens mistrust, polarization, rather than fostering understanding and unity. This guy had millions of subscribers on his YouTube channel. He's spoken to your children at colleges. He has a huge reach on other platforms and social media. And according to the data, not my opinion, this proves he was spreading hate. That's not my opinion. This is what ChatGPT says. It shows and proves he was spreading hate. Steph the media.